Golden Doves Class 178, we're on page 100, new section, section 3, written and oral texts. Rabbinic Judaism recognizes the authority of two laws, the scriptures and oral tradition. Of course, we have the Torah Shebechtav and the Torah Shebe'al Peh. According to the popular view, this implies that it is forbidden to write down the oral law. So the reason we have the Torah Shebe'al Peh, the reason it's called Torah Shebe'al Peh, that's so the popular view is because it's forbidden to write down the words of the Torah Shebe'al Peh. Here's a quote. Let me have the footnote ready also. This is going to be footnote 1. Right. So this is from Lieberman's, I believe, Hellenism in Jewish Palestine. Yeah. As for the rabbinic sources themselves, they state clearly that the oral law is not to be put down in writing. So that's a quote from Lieberman. In point of fact, says my father, in no place in rabbinic literature is there an injunction against writing the oral law. What the rabbis say is that the oral law may not be recited, that is, authoritatively transmitted through a written document. Right, so devarim shebe'al peh yata rashai le'omram bichtav. So vayomer Adonai Moshe lemor means an authoritative statement by God, which Moshe Rabbeinu will repeat lemor to the Jewish people. That's an authoritative statement. So how do you transmit an authoritative statement? So the Torah Shebichtav is transmitted through actual written scrolls. And that's the authority lies in the written scroll. In the case of Torah Shebe'al Peh, there was no authoritative transmission through a written scroll. That's why it's Yata Rashai le'omram bichtav. Right? The Geonim and most rabbinic authorities in Spain maintain that the difference between written and oral pertains only to the manner in which authoritative transmission is effected. You see, that's the point. So, Devarim shebichtav yata rashai le'omram al peh means you're not going to transmit, for example, the book of Bereshit by saying it out loud and by heart, even if you know it by heart perfectly, and then you transmit it, and then the other person receives it that way. Well, this is such a fundamental point, such an incredible point, and such an illuminating point. The text of scriptures is handed down on the basis of authoritative manuscripts. Right? That's how you transmit the Torah, shebichtav. Whereas the oral text is handed down by the masters and official reciters. That's why you have Tanaim. So the purpose of the Soferim is to write down the Torah shebichtav. The purpose of the Tanaim and transmit the writing to the people. The purpose of the Tanaim is to transmit the Torah Shebe'al Peh. The well-known rabbinic law, oral words or rule, oral word may not be said in writing. You see, Devarim shebe'al peh yata rashai le'omram bichtav, and written words are not to be recited orally. Devarim shebichtav yata rashai le'omram al peh refers to the way in which these texts are to be transmitted, not to the way in which they should be recorded. If a person wants to write down, I don't know, he's sitting in Ohel Moed and he wants to write down some notes of what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, he's allowed to, even though those notes could be Torah Shebe'al Peh. But there's nothing wrong with recording something. I'm sitting in a class, I want to take notes. Of course I can record it. This isn't even recording and transmitting. The entire chain of transmission must be oral. That's the point. One cannot refer to a written document as the source of a transmission or as a link in the chain of transmission. So you'll ever see, for example, in the Gemara, they're analyzing different baraitot and different halachot. You'll ever see somebody say, wait, it's written here. This is what's written here, right? And that's not, the authority doesn't lie in the writing. You do have cases in the Gemara where you have Megillat Setarim, but the authority there doesn't lie in the writing, in the content of the written Megillah. The authority lies in its transmission by whoever the chain of transmission was. So the Megillat Setarim by itself would not be sufficient. Meaning, the fact that there's a Megillat Setarim will show that yes, they were recording things, writing things, to remember things, but that's not the transmission. You never have transmission of Megillot, Ish Mipi Ish, in the case of Torah Shebaal Peh, of course. For this reason, an objection was raised against a rabbi in the Holy Land who wanted to send a letter to a colleague in Babylonia with the correct version of some Tannaitic material. That's very interesting. The rabbis asked, how could the rabbi in Babylonia transmit a tradition based on a written authority? Wow, that's very, very, very interesting. Yeah. Let me just see. Right. According to the popular view that it is forbidden to write the oral law, then it should also follow that it is forbidden to recite scripture from memory. If you're saying that it's asur to write the oral law, well, according to that logic, it should be forbidden to say pesukim from the Bereshit barayinu im tashamayim b'ta'aretz. I just said it be'al peh. That should be forbidden, right? Hence, one would have to assume that when the rabbis quoted the Bible, it was from scrolls that they were carrying containing the 24 books of the Hebrew scripture. The French commentators attempted to avoid this problem by declaring that this injunction does not apply to quotations made when studying, but only when one is officiating for others so that they may fulfill their religious obligation. Okay, so that's what the Tosafot says in Temurah, to try to explain, because according to them, it's forbidden to write down the oral law, and therefore it should be forbidden to recite Pesukim Be'al Peh. So what you want to say that every time a Hacham had to quote a Pasuk, he needed to bring out the Sifrei Torah scrolls and read the Pasuk from the scrolls? It doesn't make sense. So they say no. So they say only when you're officiating for others to fulfill a religious obligation, then it's forbidden to say it by heart. That's what the Tosafot say in Temurah. This position cannot be accepted on several grounds. To begin with, the symmetric construction of the statement demands that the same principle also apply to the first part of the statement. Right. So no such religious obligation concerning the recitation of oral tradition may be found. So if you're saying that Devarim shebichtav means for the purpose of some sort of liturgical obligation, but there is no corresponding liturgical obligation in the case of Devarim shebe'al peh, right? Furthermore, in contrary to common opinion, the public recitation of the weekly portion of the Pentateuch does not involve a religious obligation to hear the Torah, as does the reading of the scroll of Esther on the holiday of Purim. Right, so they want to say, and the religious obligation that I'm fulfilling for someone else, for example, is reading the Torah. But the point my father makes is that reading the Torah is not fulfilling a personal, individual obligation. Meaning, when I read the Torah, I'm not fulfilling his or obligation to hear the Torah. It's not like Purim. In Purim, there's an obligation on every individual to hear the Megillah or to read the Megillah, as the case is. But in the case of Kiryat Torah, there is no such obligation. So that's difficult on the Tosafot, right? The fact that a minor who cannot officiate on the behalf of the others can officiate as one of the 7 principal readers of the Torah clearly shows that there is no basis to assume such a duty, right? Otherwise, how can you have Katan Oleh Minyan Shiv'ah? Katan can only be Oleh Minyan Shiv'ah if you assume that there is no religious obligation being fulfilled by the child reading the Torah in public on behalf of some other individuals, right? Moreover, in the Ma'amadot services and on the Day of Atonement at the temple, the Torah was publicly recited from memory, explicit, right? Finally, the Shema, which must be recited twice daily, consists of 2 sections, from Deuteronomy and one from Numbers, yet it is not necessary to read it from a duly copied scroll of the law. According to Tosafot, you would need to take out some sort of like Sefer Torah to say Kriyat Shema, either when discharging this duty personally or when officiating on behalf of the community, right? Elsewhere, the rabbis themselves made it clear that the above-mentioned rule concerns the liturgical recitation of the Hebrew text of the Torah and its Aramaic translation, Targum, in the synagogue. So there is a place where we're going to see soon that there is a liturgical recitation of the Torah together with the Targum. And here's the point: the Targum cannot be recited from a written scroll. So one of the explanations given is that the Devarim Shebe'al Peh is the Targum Ankelos, and unlike the Chumash, which is Devarim Shebichtav, which you must read from the scroll of the Torah, the Targum Ankelos is Devarim Shebe'al Peh, Yatar Ashal Omram Bichtav, and you're not going to read the Ankelos from a written scroll. Right? The Targum cannot be recited from a written scroll, right? That's Devarim Shebe'al Peh, Yatar Ashal Omram Bichtav. And the Torah cannot be recited by heart. That's Devarim Shebichtav, Yatar Ashal Omram Al Peh. Right? Because the Targum Ankelos was said by heart. I mean, there would be the Meturgeman would hear the pasuk and then he would say it. Today in Yemenite synagogues, they just read the Targum Ankelos. But even the reading is not Devarim Shebichtav because they're not reading it from a Gevil or Kelav. They're reading from a piece of paper, right? A similar tradition was preserved by a Spanish scholar who taught that this rule referred to the Kereh Buchtiv. Interesting, right? So Devarim Shebichtav Yatar Ashal Omram Be'al Peh means that if you have a Kereh Buchtiv and you're in public, you don't read the Ketiv part, rather you read the Kereh part, right? And similarly, when you write the Sefer Torah, you don't write the Kereh part, you write the Ketav part, or the Ketiv part. There are words in the scripture that may not be read in public or according to the written text, Ketiv. Rather, they must be read according to another version, Kereh, right? All right. The object of the rabbis was to prohibit writing down the Kereh in place of the written version. And that's what it means. Oral words, that is an oral version, you may not say in writing. You cannot put them in writing and read them aloud from the written text. Conversely, it is forbidden to recite the written text, Ketiv, and disregard the oral version. Written words, that is the Ketiv, you cannot say orally in place of the oral version. This is another explanation of what that Gemaran, or what that statement means. This tradition was accepted by Maimonides. It is important to note that in no place Maimonides codified an injunction against writing the oral law. Very interesting. There's no place in Rambam where it says haram to write the Torah Shebe'al Peh. So it shows Rambam didn't accept that as a rule, otherwise he would have written it. However, he codified the prohibition of reading the Ketiv in place of the Kereh, or writing the Kereh in place of the Ketiv that he did bring. So, yeah, I believe that's the view that Barzeloni was the original source, I believe. Since he was not in the habit of codifying laws that are not found in the Talmud, we must conclude that he accepted the above-mentioned tradition. Right. Okay, we'll stop here.